Today is September 2nd, and although I've already lived through intense moments of prayer and faith, nothing prepared me for what I'm about to share. It was on this day that something inside me gave way, and I finally asked Jesus something that had been stuck in my heart for a long time. Lord, what is the prayer that touches your heart the most? It wasn't a theological question, nor an exercise in curiosity. It was a cry from my soul, born from a place of silent exhaustion, from sleepless nights trying to figure out how to truly please God without masks, without formulas, without empty repetitions. I needed to know if, among so many words, there was one he truly heard, with tears in his eyes. But before I tell you what he answered, or rather what he made me feel, I need to be honest with you about what led me to that point. Because that question didn't come from a beautiful devotional, nor from an emotional worship service. It came from my own pain. It happened after a series of losses. First, it was the grandmother of my best friend. A woman of prayer, simple but full of faith. When she passed, the family found an old notebook beside her bed, its pages stained with tears. Inside there were no requests for miracles or promises of blessings. Just names. Names of people, neighbors, relatives, strangers. An endless list of individuals she presented to God every single day. That moved me deeply, because I had never seen that woman preach or stand on a stage, and yet there was a whole life devoted to what many of us neglect, praying for others in silence. After that, something changed in my relationship with prayer. I started asking myself, am I praying the right way? Do my words reach heaven, or just echo back to myself? Then one night, kneeling beside my bed, I whispered, Jesus, what is the prayer that touches your heart the most? I didn't hear an audible voice, but at that moment I was overwhelmed by a presence so deep, so full of compassion, that my entire body surrendered. I closed my eyes, and he took me somewhere. Not a physical place, but something my soul recognized as real. A kind of room, where there was light, but not from the sun. There was warmth, but it didn't burn. There was silence, but every silence spoke. And there, Jesus showed me scenes, not of spectacular miracles or grand temples. He showed me ordinary people praying with broken hearts, a mother kneeling beside an empty crib saying, "Even so, I trust you." An unemployed man staring at an empty plate on the table saying, "Thank you for taking care of me today." An elderly woman, forgotten by her family, quietly whispering, "Jesus, I know you're still here." And then he told me something, not in words, but my soul understood. The prayers that touch my heart the most are the ones spoken when everything seems lost, when the amen is said through tears, when there's more pain than voice. But even then they reach me. In that moment I was speechless, not because I lacked words, but because I understood that the most precious prayer to him isn't the prettiest, the longest, or the most theologically correct. It's the most sincere. Jesus showed me that a prayer of trust in the middle of chaos carries eternal weight. That when someone, from the bottom of the pit, still finds the strength to say, "I love you still," all of heaven bends down. He showed me that angels fall silent when someone prays without understanding the reason for their pain, but still chooses to talk to God. And it was there that everything inside me broke, because I realized that many of my prayers had been said seeking answers, solutions, guidance, but very few were simply to offer my heart, just as it was, in that silent vision. Jesus taught me that the prayer that touches his heart the most is the one born from total surrender, not from control, not from bargaining, but from yielding. And if you're hearing this now, perhaps it's because the Holy Spirit wants you to understand this too. You don't need to know what to say. You just need to be honest, even if it's a whisper, even if it's just a sigh, even if it's just a single tear rolling down, without words. Jesus hears, and he is moved. After that experience, I couldn't pray the same way for days. Words felt too small, because once you understand that God is moved by the simplest and most sincere things from the human heart, you can't fake strength anymore. I began to see prayer as a space where the soul tears away the veils the world keeps trying to sew shut, where there are no titles, no appearances, no merits, only truth. And it was in this new way of seeing prayer that I remembered something I heard years ago. A pastor once said, during a sermon, "The most powerful prayer ever spoken by a human came from a thief." At the time, I confess, I didn't understand, but now it made perfect sense. There, hanging on a cross beside Jesus, that man had nothing. No good deeds, no time to change his life, no chance to become someone better. Just pain, shame, and one final breath, and with it he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Luke 23:42. That's it. There was no long explanation, no detailed request, just a sentence from someone who recognized who was beside him, someone who, even in despair, dared to believe, and Jesus responded with a promise that still echoes today. "Today you will be with me in paradise." That struck me deeply, because perhaps that was one of the shortest prayers in the Bible, but also one of the ones that touched Jesus' heart the most. It made me realize that God doesn't measure a prayer by its complexity, but by its surrender, by the trust embedded in what is spoken with faith, even in pain. Because praying is easy when everything's going well. What's hard is keeping your eyes on heaven when the ground disappears. I began to remember moments when I prayed just for the sake of praying, repeating cliches or trying to impress, as if God were persuaded by a performance. But Jesus showed me that what moves him is not our beautiful words. It's when someone, in silence, just places their hand on their chest and says, "Lord, I can't go on, but I know you're here." That prayer changes everything, because it doesn't try to impress, it confesses, it surrenders. It pours out like Mary's perfume at Jesus' feet, something pure, true, that still fragrances eternity today. I began to notice that Jesus moves through what the world ignores, that the prayer which touches his heart the most might come from someone invisible to others, someone no one saw crying in their room, someone who never steps on a stage, has no followers, doesn't even know how to pray properly, but speaks to God as to the only friend who never left. And then, days after that vision, something very simple happened, but it marked me deeply. I was in line at a supermarket, tired, mind full, and in front of me stood an elderly woman. She was counting coins, very slowly, with trembling hands, and when she finally paid, in her gentle way, she looked at the cashier and said, "God bless you, okay? He takes care of us." The cashier, visibly irritated by the delay, paused, and fell silent. I realized that for a second the atmosphere shifted, and I thought, maybe. That was the most beautiful prayer spoken that day. Because while many pray to ask, others pray to remind others that God is still watching over us, even with little, even with pain, even with counted coins and tired hands. I left with that in my heart. The prayers that touch Jesus the most may be those we don't even realize we've prayed, those we release into the air like a sigh, or whisper before falling asleep, or say a soft thank you in the middle of chaos. Because prayer is not about convincing God. It's about inviting him. It's about making space. It's saying, "I still believe." And if today you feel like you don't know how to pray, that you're empty, out of words, worn out, let me remind you of what he taught me. Heaven understands the language of the heart, and if your soul is screaming inside but your mouth remains silent, know that Jesus hears you just the same. He bends down, he listens, and he is moved. I began to pay attention to the prayers around me in a different way, and I noticed that many of the most powerful prayers weren't spoken on knees or inside temples, but in hospital corridors, inside cars stuck in traffic with someone holding back tears, or in locked bathrooms where no one hears. But all of heaven does. There was something sacred about the prayers that rise when the soul has no clue what to do. And it was during that season that I remembered a passage from Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I had read it many times before, but now it made sense. Jesus doesn't draw near to the strong. He draws near to the broken. He moves toward those who have nowhere else to go, And it was in that understanding that an old memory came back. Something my mother used to do when I was a child. Whenever things got hard, when there was no money, when my father got sick, when the bills were overdue, she would light a small white candle and lock herself in the bedroom. I'd listen from the outside. She never shouted. She just repeated one single phrase, over and over. Lord, you know. I didn't understand it back then. It seemed vague, incomplete. But now, so many years later, those words returned like thunder inside me. Lord, you know. It was a prayer without explanations. No justifications. No plans. It was surrender. And if I had to summarize everything Jesus taught me in that encounter, it would be this. The prayer that touches his heart the most is the one that surrenders, not the one that tries to control. Because often, when we pray, we want to dictate the path, the timing, the method. We want God to follow our script. But Jesus showed me that there's something deeper in the kind of prayer that simply trusts without understanding. Like when Abraham climbed the mountain with Isaac, no logic, no comprehension, only faith. And even though no words were recorded, the silence of that walk was, in itself, a prayer. How many times does our silence carry more faith than 1,000 words? I began to see that the prayers that most touch heaven are those that rise when there's nothing left. When the soul stands bare before God. No masks, no defenses, no pride, and then something happened. One night, as I was praying in my room, I asked Jesus to show me one of those prayers. Not in a vision, not as a revelation, but in real life. And he answered. The next day, I received an unexpected message. It was from a friend I hadn't seen in years. She asked for help, said she was going through a difficult time and didn't know how to pray anymore. We agreed to meet. When she arrived, her eyes were swollen, holding a small notebook in her hands. She told me she had lost her father weeks earlier, and since then, everything seemed to be falling apart. She could no longer go to church. She couldn't sing or open her Bible, but every night she would write something in the notebook, scattered words, fragments, sometimes just the name of God. She said, I don't know if this counts as prayer. I opened that notebook, and there I saw one of the most moving prayers I've ever laid eyes on. Pages with phrases like, God, today it hurt too much. Why didn't you say anything? I'm still here. Even though I don't feel you, I seek you. Don't leave me. I couldn't hold back the tears, because in that moment I understood. The prayer that most touches Jesus may be written through tears when no one is watching, when everything seems dark, but the soul still seeks the light. I took her hand and said, You've been praying, more powerfully than you realize, because you've been praying truthfully, and that's what moves God's heart. Prayer doesn't need a stage, it needs a broken heart. It needs someone willing to be honest, even while shattered. Jesus isn't looking for perfect speeches. He's looking for surrendered hearts. And in that moment, I clearly felt the Holy Spirit reminding me of something. Heaven never despises a sincere cry, even if it's just a whisper, even if it comes from a dark place, even if it seems weak, because where there is sincerity, there is presence, and where there is presence, there is an answer, even if that answer is simply the fact that we're not alone. Some answers don't come while we're waiting, but when we are silent. It was on an ordinary afternoon, as I was silently doing the dishes, that an unexpected memory struck me like lightning. The prayer of a child at his father's funeral. It was an old scene. I must have been around 12. We were at the cemetery, surrounded by people weeping. But a boy younger than me, with red eyes and a dusty face, approached the coffin, held its edge, and said in a low voice, Jesus, take care of him for me. And if you can, help me not forget his smell. In that moment, no one seemed to hear. But I did, and I never forgot it. Years later, I understood why that phrase stuck with me. Because it was a true prayer, born from a broken heart, and still full of faith. That child didn't know how to craft beautiful sentences. He had no idea how theology explained life after death. But he spoke to Jesus like one speaks to a real friend. No filters, no doubts. And that's exactly what touches his heart. A prayer without barriers, without a show, without masks. Jesus showed me that what he desires is intimacy, not religiosity. And true intimacy doesn't require fancy words, just a sincere presence. I started thinking about how most of us were taught to pray. Many learned out of fear, others out of obligation. Some only talk to God when something goes wrong. And others just repeat what they've heard but never said it from the heart. But Jesus never wanted formality. He wants closeness. And that sometimes we must unlearn. Unlearn praying out of habit, unlearn praying to impress, unlearn praying only to ask. He wants to be sought as a father who listens, as a friend who stays, as the God who answers, even what we don't say. I remember once entering a hospital room to visit an elderly man from church. He'd been unconscious for days. The family around him prayed quietly, full of hope, but what marked me the most was his daughter. She didn't make a long prayer. She knelt beside the bed, took her father's hand, and with a trembling voice said, "Dad, if you can, hear me. I love you. Jesus is here with us." Just that, but in that instant I felt such an intense presence in that room. It seemed all of heaven had descended. Because it was a prayer full of love, but also pain. It was an encounter. And Jesus shows up in real encounters, not rehearsals. That's why he says in Matthew 6:6, "But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." The true altar isn't made of stone, it's made of truth. And in that secret, Jesus mentions, lies the place where prayers are born that truly touch his heart. Not those spoken aloud to show holiness, but those that rise when the door is closed and the heart is wide open. Have you noticed how Jesus, in the most crucial moments of life, always sought that place of intimate prayer? Before choosing the 12 disciples, he went up the mountain alone. Before being arrested, he wept blood. In Gethsemane, alone with the Father. And even on the cross, though surrounded by a crowd, he prayed not to impress anyone, but to surrender everything. "Father, forgive them. My God, why have you forsaken me? Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Each of those phrases was a prayer, brief, direct, raw, but completely full of surrender. And it's that surrender that still touches Jesus' heart today. The prayer he hears most isn't the one trying to manipulate heaven. It's the one that yields, the one that says, "I don't understand, I have no strength, but I'm still here." The prayer he listens to most is made with the knees of the soul, when bending the body is no longer enough. And what bends is pride, fear, resistance. If you're tired of praying and seeing no response, maybe it's time to stop trying, to control the conversation, and just speak from the heart. Jesus does not ignore those who speak with honesty, even if the voice is weak, even if the moment is dark, even if the words are reduced to a simple help. All of heaven moves when someone prays sincerely. Sometimes the prayer that most changes a life is said at the very moment when everything inside wants to give up. I was talking to an old acquaintance from church, someone who had served actively for a long time, but had disappeared without a trace. He reached out months later, eyes tired, countenance downcast. He said he'd gone through a series of losses, job, marriage, his mother hospitalized, his faith nearly gone. And in the midst of all that pain, he told me he locked himself in his car, in an empty parking lot, and said, "Jesus, I don't even know if you still hear me, but if you're there, I need you." That phrase froze me, because it was the most real confession someone could make. No promises of change, no attempt to look strong, just an honest sigh from the soul, a naked, unarmed cry from someone who had lost everything, except the hope of being heard. And there, in that car, with no one around, he experienced his first moment of peace in months. Not because the situation changed, but because someone answered in the silence. And it was in that moment that he understood. The most powerful prayer isn't the one that convinces God. It's the one that invites him. His presence isn't earned. It reveals itself when we allow ourselves to be fragile before him. The Apostle Paul experienced this. When he prayed 3 times for the thorn in his flesh to be removed, he received an unexpected answer. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12-9. How many times do we pray asking to be strong? But God is waiting for us to accept our weakness, so he can be strong in us. The heart of Jesus isn't moved by resistance. He is moved when we surrender. And that's why many of the most impactful prayers in the Bible were born from anguish. Hannah, when she couldn't have children, went to the temple and prayed with such depth she could barely move her lips. Words barely came out. The priest thought she was drunk. But God understood, and he answered. They weren't eloquent words, it was a broken heart. And that's the secret. God doesn't respond to well-crafted phrases. He responds to truth. And the truer our cry is, the closer he comes, because heaven never rejects a prayer made with sincerity. Remembered something that happened to me personally in a silent dawn. I had gone through a humiliating situation. I felt betrayed, ashamed, exposed. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the bathroom floor, my back against the cold wall, and said, "Jesus, I don't know how to move on after this." And in that silence, I felt as if a presence wrapped around me. I didn't hear a voice, I didn't see a light. But my heart was flooded with something I can only describe as comfort. A peace that made no sense. Yet it was real. It was as if he said without words, "You're still mine." And that was everything, because when you feel rejected by everyone, knowing that God still calls you mine, that heals. Jesus doesn't only respond with miracles. Many times, he responds with presence. And that's what makes prayer so precious. It's not a ritual, it's a meeting. It's the place where our ruins touch eternity. But for that to happen, we need to pray with honesty, with a bare heart, without trying to hide what he already sees. Sometimes the best prayer is, "Lord, I don't understand. Lord, I'm tired. Lord, I don't even know what to say." And that's okay. Jesus even hears the silence. He translates what we can't even express. Romans 8:26 says, "The Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know what we should pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groans that words cannot express." Do you understand that? Even the most stifled groan has translation in heaven. Even what never became a phrase but was felt deeply in your chest, God heard it, and he answers. Sometimes with an unexplainable peace, sometimes with a hug through someone, sometimes with silence, but a silence that heals. Because the prayer that touches the heart of Jesus the most isn't measured by volume, but by surrender. It's the whisper through tears. It's the stay with me in the middle of the crisis. It's the help me keep going when everything inside you wants to stop. So if today you're trying to find the words, maybe the best prayer is simply to open your heart and say, "I still believe." There are days when we talk to God not because we have a lot of faith, but because it's all we have left. It was on a grey Sunday, the kind where even the sky seems discouraged, that I received a message that paralyzed me for a few seconds. It was from a follower who had watched one of the videos and decided to open up. She wrote, "I don't pray anymore. I feel ashamed. I've asked so many times and nothing has changed. I don't want to bother God with another one of my disappointments." I read that several times, and all I felt was pain. Not because she had stopped praying, but because she believed God was tired of her. How many people today remain silent because of that belief? Because they think they've failed too much, sinned too much, asked too much, and that they've already crossed the limit of what's acceptable. But Jesus showed me that the prayer that touches his heart the most may come from exactly that place. From that corner of the soul where we believe we no longer deserve to be heard. Because right there, where pride no longer exists, the most honest surrender is born. Many times we think praying means presenting a good version of ourselves to God. But he doesn't want the upgraded version. He wants you just as you are, with your failures, with your doubts, with your broken pieces. He's not shocked by our weakness. On the contrary, he draws near. That's what he did with Peter. After the denial, after the fear, after the shame, Jesus went to him and asked 3 times, "Do you love me?" Peter didn't give a sermon. He didn't promise perfection. He simply replied with what he had left. "Lord, you know I love you." That prayer, simple, broken, full of repentance and love, was enough. Jesus restored Peter right there with those words. And that's why the most powerful prayer doesn't always come from someone strong. Sometimes it comes from someone shattered inside, but who can still whisper, "I still love you." That follower's message moved me deeply. And after praying for her, I wrote back, "You're not bothering Jesus, you move his heart. Because it's precisely now, when everything in you wants to stay silent, that your voice matters most." I wish more people understood this, that they knew Jesus doesn't turn away from those who fail. He draws near to those who surrender. No matter how many times you've fallen, what touches heaven isn't the number of falls. It's the heart that insists on rising again and saying, "Lord, I can't do it alone." That's how it was with the prodigal son. He returned home not even knowing what to say. He had a speech prepared, but the father interrupted him before he could finish, because the repentant heart arrived before the words. The most beautiful prayer is often the one the father hears from afar while the son is still on his way. I've seen people pray crying in anger, people praying with a voice broken by pain, people praying in silence, hand over chest, eyes lost. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, Jesus heard every single one. You don't need to know how to begin. You don't need the right tone or perfect words. The prayer that moves heaven the most is the one that comes from a real place. Like the time I met a widow sitting on a bench at the park. Her eyes were closed and her lips were moving. I came closer, curious, and asked if she was okay. She smiled and answered, "I'm just chatting with Jesus. I told him I needed a hug today." That stayed with me. Because in that simplicity, there was an intimacy many of us have lost. She didn't ask for money, she didn't ask for healing, she didn't ask for answers, she just wanted to feel she wasn't alone. And that too is a prayer. In fact, it might be one of the most powerful, "Stay with me." Jesus cannot resist that request. He cannot resist a sincere heart, no matter how broken, tired, or confused it is. If you feel your voice is weak, know this, even your silence has a sound in heaven. Jesus understands what no one sees. He hears what no one else does. And he answers in the deepest way, with presence. There are moments when what we most want is not an answer, just to know he's still listening. One night, while trying to rest after a long day, an unexpected question came to mind. Does Jesus still listen to someone who has stopped talking to him? It may sound strange, but it was a real doubt. Because I knew people who, due to wounds, frustrations, or guilt, had gone silent. Not because of lack of faith, but because of too much pain. And I wanted to understand. Does their silence still reach heaven? That's when Jesus reminded me of something that changed my view on everything. He hears even what hasn't been said. Psalm 139 says, "Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether." That verse struck me like a beam of mercy, because it showed that Jesus doesn't need beautiful words to draw near. He's already there, even before the mouth opens. And that made me think of how many unspoken prayers were actually the deepest cries, like the gaze of someone staring at the sky with eyes full of tears, like the stifled sigh of someone going through a loss, like the desperate silence of someone who feels they've failed too much. Those moments are prayers. Maybe no one else notices, but Jesus does. Because the prayer that touches his heart doesn't always have sound. Sometimes it comes in the form of a tear, or a simple gesture, or a thought so sincere it seems to scream inside, "Jesus, I can't take it anymore. But I still want you here." And that's enough. I remember a young woman I met during a spiritual retreat. She always stayed quiet, sitting in a corner. While everyone else sang and prayed out loud, she only watched. On the last night, She came up to me and said, "I didn't speak to God even once while I was here, but I thought about him the entire time." I smiled because I understood what she meant. Her soul was in prayer, even if her mouth said nothing. And I told her, "Jesus heard everything. He hears even what only your heart is screaming." She cried, and in that moment I knew that was a prayer. There, in that silent weeping, in that quiet recognition, heaven was present. That's how Jesus works. He leans down to those who no longer have strength. He understands even the words we can't put together. And if you're living through days like that, where praying seems impossible, know this, you're still being heard. Jesus doesn't measure your devotion by how many sentences you say. He measures it by the surrender of your heart. Sometimes, all we can say is, "Help me, hear me, find me." And those words, small in sound, are massive in the soul. They touch his heart with a force you can't imagine. I remember a scene I once witnessed at a funeral. A woman, with her hands on her husband's coffin, said nothing. She just stared, and from time to time she shook her head as if to say, "Why?" She didn't speak out loud, but her gaze screamed, and in that silence, there was prayer. A raw surrender, exposed pain, a wordless cry, but one that, I'm certain, was heard by heaven. Jesus doesn't ignore a wounded heart. He doesn't require speeches. He draws near to those who allow themselves to feel. And even amid the pain, seek him, even if it's just in thought. That's why, when Lazarus died and Martha came to meet Jesus, she didn't pray in the traditional sense. She simply said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She spoke with pain, with disappointment, with honesty. And still, Jesus didn't rebuke her. He was moved, he wept with her, and he resurrected hope. So if you feel empty, weak, as if heaven is far away, remember, heaven doesn't demand performance. It responds with presence. It listens even to the most fragile, imperfect human thoughts. Because prayer is more than words. It's allowing him to see what's inside you, even when you don't know how to show it. There's something I need to tell you, with all the weight of what I've lived through. Jesus isn't looking for flawless prayers. He's not listening to see who speaks the most beautifully, or who uses the right words. After everything he's revealed to me, I understood. What touches his heart the most isn't the power of the voice, but the honesty of the heart. It all started with a simple question, but the answer was so deep that I could never pray the same way again. And it wasn't an answer with direct words. It was an immersion into scenes, people, tears, sighs, and silences, where Jesus showed me that he draws near to those who fully surrender, even if they're in pieces. The question was, "Lord, what is the prayer that touches your heart the most?" And today, I can tell you, the most powerful prayer of all is the one that comes without masks, the one that flows from the depths of the soul, the one that doesn't try to seem strong, the one that doesn't hide pain, the one that isn't rehearsed. It's when the person no longer has the strength to impress and only wants to be heard. Jesus isn't expecting a performance. He's expecting presence. It doesn't matter if your voice trembles, if the tears interrupt, if the sentence comes out broken. He understands everything. Because he's not just listening to what you say, he's listening to what you feel. Today when I kneel, I don't stay thinking about what I'm going to say. I just place myself there. And sometimes my only prayer is, "Stay with me." And that sentence carries everything. It carries longing. It carries pain. It carries trust. It carries faith. It carries surrender. His presence is enough. And I discovered that the presence of Jesus doesn't come because we deserve it. It comes because he loves. And he loves unconditionally. If you understood this, if you accept it, you'll never again be afraid to pray. Because prayer stops being an obligation and becomes a refuge. Prayer becomes the place where you can be yourself, without spiritual makeup, without a script, without guilt. It's the moment when heaven leans in to hear even what you don't dare to say. Jesus heard the woman who only touched the edge of his cloak. He heard Bartimaeus even in the middle of the crowd. He heard the thief on the cross even in his last seconds. He heard Peter when the rooster crowed. He heard Martha in the midst of sorrow. He heard Hannah when no one else understood her words. And he still hears today. He hears you. He hears right now, even if your prayer is, Jesus, help me pray again. Even if you've been silent for months. Even if you think he no longer wants to hear you. Even if your faith is wounded, he is still there. Waiting for the smallest space to come in. Waiting for the smallest gesture to reveal himself. Waiting for the faintest sound of the soul to say, I never stopped listening to you. If there's one thing that became clear to me along this journey, it's this. Jesus doesn't ignore a broken heart. He draws near to it. He doesn't despise tears. He gathers them. He doesn't demand perfection. He embraces weakness and, maybe, just maybe. The prayer that touches his heart the most is the one you thought wasn't worth anything, the one you whispered, the one that only said, help me, the one that never became words but stayed buried in your chest. All of those he heard, and now he wants you to know. Not to impress you, but to set you free. Free from guilt, from pressure, from the demand, from the idea that you need to be better to be heard. You only need to be honest. And if I can leave you with one last sentence, with everything I carry in my heart today, it would be this. The prayer that touches the heart of Jesus the most is the one made with all you have, even if all you have is almost nothing. Because to him, a little with truth is worth more than a lot with appearance. Speak to him today. In your way, in your time, but speak, even if it's in a whisper with your eyes closed and a sigh trapped in your chest. That is already a prayer, and he is already listening. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. There is someone right now who needs to know that Jesus still listens. Share this video with someone you love, and in the comments write just one sentence, Jesus, I still believe. Let's fill this space with heartfelt prayers because heaven is reading every single one. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and stay tuned for upcoming videos. Here, you never pray alone.